Welcome back. It is indeed the Jeff Santos Show. 31 minutes past the hour. We are going to be talking with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield in a couple of minutes about all the media stuff going on today and over the last few days regarding our good friend Senator Sanders. But before we do that, I want to let you know that there is some legislation going on right now in Tony Cabral's committee. John Bussinger will be with us on Thursday. Was testifying earlier today in front of the committee, and we're hoping, because this is again another event that Mr. Baker is doing that will destroy any chances of the North-South Rail Link ever happening. They've been fighting for this thing for, well, the longest John Bussinger's been alive, but even before that. So this is an important piece. We'll keep you aware of all these votes. John and others, including our great friend and person who made this show possible here at 1530, Mark Pacheco, the state senator, and get his thoughts, and Mr. Cabral as well, as we will over the coming days, including former Governor Dukakis. All right, let's bring in our next guest. He is a great journalist. He's the Renaissance man. He is Mark Taylor-Canfield, and he joins us on the line. How you doing, Mark?
Oh, Jeff, there's so much going on. But I've got my cup of really good Java here, which is, I call my stimulus package. So it's a big tremendous with that from the Obama administration. But yeah, I just covered the Elizabeth Warren campaign stop here in Seattle. And so we got a first-hand look at Elizabeth Warren for the second time. Actually, she was here in last August, at the International Fountain, and at that time she was able to draw about 15,000 people. But this time, about 7,000 showed up. But it was a really fired-up crowd. I mean, they really. She definitely has her supporters in this area of the country, and especially, of course, she's very popular amongst women. So I just wanted to, give you a quick rundown on that. Actually, she was introduced by Toshiko Hasegawa, who's the director of the Washington State Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs. And then there was also Jesus Karbacha, who is a campaign volunteer and U.S. Army veteran who did 3 tours in Afghanistan. He did the opening remarks. And then, according to her campaign manager, Roger Lau, they confirmed that there were 7,000 or over 7,000. There was actually an overflow room on the side. And, so I got a chance to talk to her about press freedom issues, which is really the issue that nobody is talking about amongst any of the candidates. Now, I have had a chance to talk to Ro-Khanna. Ro-Khanna and Mark Pocan both got briefings from me and from Democracy Watch News about these issues of press freedom, including the fact that the United States is ranked 48th in the world in terms of press freedom by Reporters Without Borders currently. So there's been a steady decline in our ranking on the World Press Freedom Index, and anybody can check it out. Just type in RSF, which is actually the French spelling for Reporters Without Borders, rsf.org, and it's all laid out in front of you there why the United States has dipped to this level. But I was able to give her a heads up on it, and I've also been able to talk to, mention it to Bernie Sanders. So I'm trying to get these people to start thinking about press freedom issues, not just in terms of what Trump has been saying, but also the fact that there's been a big increase in the prosecution of both whistleblowers and reporters associated with those whistleblowers. And that brings up a big problem for reporters like me, because although there are some state laws that protect journalists from being forced to reveal their sources or go to jail, the only other choice you have, there is no federal shield laws, Jeff. So that's one thing that I'm really trying to push and hope to lobby some of these candidates and whoever becomes president and my Congress members and other Congress members to try to introduce legislation in Congress to try to change this and give reporters some protection. Because in other Western European democracies, that's pretty much the de rigueur, as the French would say. It's just you have to protect your journalists. You can't have people going to jail, which has happened in the United States.
Well, no, I mean, it happened here in Massachusetts not too long ago, and the ex-wife of a former sports journalist here in town. We had him on the other day. Bob Lobel's ex-wife, Susan Warnick, was trying to protect her sources and so forth and was jailed. And it's happened time and time again. And, of course, you had American journalists that were jailed in places like Iran and so on and so forth. And it doesn't happen just overseas. It happens right here in the good old USA. So there's a whole slew of things that is happening. And I want to talk to you about this, Mark, because it really has been bugging me over the last 24, less than, I guess, 13, 14 hours. Because this is what happens when you don't have an independent journalist like yourself, like what I do here on radio, like many of these journalists that have been arrested, our friends at The Nation, our friends at The Intercept, and so on and so forth. What I saw this morning was disgusting, how corporate TV folks at CNN deciding, of course, producers booked this, and I understand it because I've been on these networks. They book somebody on to talk about usually a certain issue. And they decided to get a Sanders surrogate, a state senator from South Carolina, an African-American woman who you thought was going to be talking about the issues of whether or not the campaign would be able to garner enough African-American votes. Is it going to be one of these generational things? Is Bernie going to do very well, win place, or show? All these things. What is she asked about? She's asked about Fidel Castro and the comment that Bernie made on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, of course, works for CNN now as well as CBS 60 Minutes. And then they basically bullied her into giving an answer. They wouldn't give her the time to talk about this. She said, look, this is not really what I'm here to talk about, or words to that effect. Yeah. And this is the stuff that went on. And they bullied her, and then they brought up the idea that it's going to hurt the Democratic Party in Florida. And, and she basically, this is what happened for about 7 or 8 minutes of the interview. 2 anchors on her basically saying, well, Bernie is no good. That's what basically they weren't trying to say without actually, using those words. And this is the sort of thing that I think that makes journalism look bad. And I think that the distinction, and I tweeted it out and I tweeted at you, is that it's corporate journalism versus people who are doing this to inform the public and to try to do the right thing. And this, to me, Mark, is unfortunately, it's happening too often. We saw what Chris Matthews, I know you tweeted it out and I retweeted it, he had to apologize because he compared, the big win of Nevada the other day to the fall of France by the Nazis. It's sad. It's sad what is happening to media today. Your thoughts? Basically saying, well, Bernie is no good. That's what basically they weren't trying to say without actually, using those words. And this is the sort of thing.
He loves dictators, so don't give me this crap. This is what my friends in Britain would call poppycock, right?
Right.
There's no sense to this at all because Sanders thinks that education and health care is a good thing. He's a communist.
Right, exactly.
Give me a break. Trump has no problem with betting up to folks like Putin or the regime in Turkey that destroys opposition news organizations. We know the kind of people that he admires, and his whole stance is this kind of authoritarian, anti-freedom of the press kind of guy. Well, that's dictatorship, and that's authoritarianism. So meanwhile, Trump and his unethical buddies are buddying up with these, people that are undermining our democratic republic. So I guess these days, Jeff, government is business and business is government. And bottom line, the billionaires are attempting to rule the nation. The propaganda machines, and both in the Democratic and the Republican parties, are trying to convince folks that democratic socialism is a bigger threat than an outlaw authoritarian president. Now, that's the underlying thing. It's not as much of a threat as billionaires taking over the country, which is what Mike Bloomberg would like to do. But I have very little time for all this nonsense, Jeff, because I'm really busy as a journalist and as a musician. And, I've been covering these campaigns and talking to the candidates, and whatever you have to say about him, Sanders is the most consistent politician that I've ever covered as a journalist, and probably the most courageous. So, I can only say this. The young folks involved in the politics and the activist movements around climate change are not going to settle for a Fox News world anymore, okay? They're angry and they're motivated, and it's not going to take them long to teach their elders a few lessons about how to deal with crises head on, without all the political pandering to Wall Street and, you know, all the sellouts that are blocking the way. So maybe I should just do this, you know, because there's somebody who said it much better than me a long time ago, and I don't know if you can hear this. It goes something like this. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging, so get out of the new one if you can lend a hand, for the times they are changing.
All right, that's Mark Taylor Dillon. Right on.
That's what I hear at Bernie Sanders rallies. A lot of young folks who are fed up. They're tired of it. I mean, come on. Bernie Sanders has Native American ceremonies before his events. He's got a lot of support from the tribes, which is, you know, something we haven't talked about, but Elizabeth Warren obviously has a problem with that. There's a lot of pushback against her amongst Native Americans and especially folks who consider themselves Cherokee. So, you know, why not face the fact that even though I'm really dismayed about how polarized and prejudiced politics has become, you know, because everybody seems to have an opinion, and he's usually the only one that counts, and people don't seem to care about justice if they just want to get their own way. But it's really sad, and the media buys into this so badly, the corporate media, that I'm embarrassed sometimes to call myself an American journalist. Now, I assume that most of all this nonsense comes from being manipulated by, what, big business, corporate-controlled political parties, and corporate-controlled monopolies that own the media. So they want you to believe a certain line. They want you to look through a certain frame point, which is very beneficial to their interests. However, not very beneficial to the average working-class person in America. And Bernie Sanders says, enough. Let's try something else. We went radical right with Donald Trump and all his crazy, you know, proto-fascism, which is what Robert Craig calls it. So how about a little bit of social democracy? Now, he calls himself a democratic socialist, but if you read the article in Business Insider, the Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court, where most corporations are registered, he says that anybody who says that Bernie Sanders is a communist is revealing their own, quote, profound ignorance. And this guy has been behind some of the biggest business types in the country, and he knows what he's talking about. So I encourage people to check out that article. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Delaware is telling you, if you buy into any of this corporate media or Republican nonsense or Democratic Party establishment nonsense, and by the way, what other candidate takes on his own party's courageously as Bernie Sanders has done? He is calling him out right now. He's saying this is a battle with the Democratic Party establishment, and he's not mincing words at all. This is straightforward, a head-on political battle here. And if he's elected, Jeff, it will be a political revolution for the United States of America. Because even though elections these days are big business, just like war, you know as well as I do, because you've been around it for a long time, how many billions of dollars are being exchanging hands right now during this election season. But if he is elected, it will be a political revolution for the United States. A democratic socialist, or a social democrat, was what they would call him in Europe, a man whose time has probably come, and a person that the Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court says is a centrist in terms of European politics. So there you go.
Well, you know, the truth is that Bernie Sanders is doing what FDR wanted to do. You know, is he a communist? Some people called him a democratic socialist. He's doing what Harry Truman, who introduced Medicare for All. He's doing what Jerry Brown's father, Pat Brown, did in 1960, which gave California, the largest state in the union, free public university, great university of University of California, Berkeley, UC Davis, UC San Diego, and most notably UCLA, all for free if you were a citizen in California. Is he any different than what Eisenhower was doing at the 90% tax rate, which, you know, is not even close to where Bernie Sanders is talking about, even with his increases for the wealthy tax? Is it also what LBJ was doing, Medicare for everyone, or Medicaid for those who needed it, for civil rights and voting rights, everybody? All that happened, and all of what Bernie Sanders is looking to do is bringing it back. That's all. This is not coming out, again, you know, as I was joking earlier, this is not coming out of Fidel Castro's cigar. You know, no matter how good a Cuban cigar is, I don't smoke, but people say it's good. And, you know, this is all stuff that's been done, and it's all American apple pie and Chevrolet. It's just the fact that the Democratic Party, led by Bill Clinton and others, has basically abandoned it. You know, and this is what's happened.
Didn't McCarthyism go out of style a while ago when good Republicans like Eisenhower turned on Senator McCarthy? I mean, aren't we done with this by now?
Well,
I mean, isn't it time to
Donald Trump got elected, unfortunately. So,
I mean, this is something that my father grew up with, so I've had enough. I mean, they're talking, the political dialogue in the United States is about 50 years old, and people just don't get it anymore that all these, you know, and it's not just the older generation. Somebody like Mayor Pete, I mean, he's not an old man, but he's buying into the Wall Street corporate control kind of attitude about the Democratic Party, which means you have to scare people about Bernie Sanders because apparently he's just going to take over, and this one guy who with no help from any of the other socialists in the government, which don't exist, is going to turn us into some kind of Castro regime dictatorship. And I'm thinking, has anybody looked at the guy who's in office right now?
Exactly.
Hello?
Exactly. And the socialism for the
dictators. There you go.
Right. No doubt. We're talking to our great friend Mark Taylor-Canfield, the Renaissance Man of the Jeff Santos Show and the Renaissance Man in Seattle, WA. He, of course, you can find him on Democracy News. You can also find him on, of course, Daily Kos, and right here every Tuesday on the Jeff Santos Show from 5:30 to 6 o'clock Eastern Time. That's 2:30 to 3 Pacific Time. Mark, one of the things that I think is also important in the media world that we both work in is the idea of people understanding, and I saw this last night on the Colbert Show, and I tweeted out because they allowed the former mayor of Chicago to come on and just trash Bernie Sanders, Rahm Emanuel, and the fact that he was allowed to be doing this. Now, Colbert pushed back on a couple of points. I didn't watch the whole interview, so maybe he did more. I just had a hard time, continuing to watch through the commercials. But, and I love Colbert for what he's done, and he's actually given Bernie Sanders a fair chance. I think he's one of his most frequent guests. But there's so many people that come on because they have a name, senator or governor or mayor. They get carte blanche. And I asked the media, and I think this is another big part of it. It goes right back to, we're talking with our friends at Mass Peace Action, question authority. It's when I first started being a journalist, and going to journalism school, there was the fact that was the always idea. You have to basically, people who are in power, question them. If they're a leader, they should be questioned. Just because they get a senator or a member of Congress before their name, representative or whatever, they don't know everything, and they need to be pushed back upon. And I think that, to me, is sometimes lacking when you have anchors, frankly, who don't do enough research or, in some cases, not given the ability to question them because they're producers and editors and executives that run these networks. It's no, you can't do that. He's off limits. Unfortunately, we see too much of that today, Mark. Your thoughts?
It's just hard to know where to start when you try to critique coverage of this election because, just from my point of view, being, executive director of Democracy Watch News, my concern is about issues of press freedom. My concern is about challenges to our democratic republic, which means that I'm interested in things like voter suppression. I'm interested in things like the jailing of journalists for revealing their sources. I'm interested in things that directly affect our democracy, like the Electoral College, the problem with the superdelegates, the monopoly, corporate-owned media monopolies, which control the message that gets out, and this idea that you can just buy your way into office. I think they like the back and forth and the horse race and the competition like it's a sport, and they forget about what the real issues are. And a lot of them, I have to say, are not all that well educated and don't think about the larger issues. They're in a, 1 hour, half-hour news cycle where all they can think about is the next headline. And so they miss things like what you guys were talking about before, very important issues like how many people actually did vote during the last election. What percentage of the population actually elected Donald Trump? And no one ever talks about that. These are very, very basic issues that we all should be talking about and that really describe the place that we're in today. 46.9%, let's call it 45%. This is the United States Election Project. That's my source. 2016 presidential election turnout rate. 46.9% people didn't vote at all.
Yep.
So actually 25.5% people of the eligible voters voted for Trump. That's who elects our candidates. And so I'm looking for pro-democracy movements where the franchise is going to be expanded, not decreased, where the typical corporate money influences are not going to be the determining factor in the politics. And I'm looking around, Jeff, and I'm trying to find it, and I'm finding it with Bernie Sanders. I'm not really seeing much of that. I mean, even Elizabeth Warren now is taking some PAC money, so Sanders seems to be the only candidate who doesn't take the billionaires' money, and they don't want him to. They don't like him, you know. And also, I was talking to my neighbor the other day, and I mean, he has a lot to say especially about race relations in the United States. And he looked at me and said, "Mark, unfortunately, Trump is what America is in a lot of this country, and we got to change that. But it might take time, like you said, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement." He said, "What happened in August of 1920, Mark?" And I'm thinking, "Well, what happened in August?" The 19th Amendment, right? The Women's Rights Act changed everything in this country. The Civil Rights Movement, the Voting Rights Act changed everything in this country. It's almost like we kind of have to start all over again and get back to FDR and start in the Civil Rights Movement and Kennedy and get it going again, because people have given in to this mass media and this billionaire class, which, by the way, you know, my opinion is that they can really only push so far before the people start pushing back. And this is the idea that you can just buy an election after the Citizens United Supreme Court decision is ruining the country and allowing very wealthy people to control our elections. So there's never been as many billionaires involved in this election in the past. I've never seen this before. In fact, there are fewer and fewer rich folks who own more and more of the media and more of the economic resources, leads to a point where it's not sustainable anymore. So eventually people rise up and they push back, and that's why you see a Democratic Socialist as the front runner for the election of the United States president, which is unheard of, right, since the days of FDR. So look, let's be clear. Bernie Sanders would say, that's what he always says, like, let's be clear, we've had 4 years of a right-wing revolutionary politics, and it's taken us in a very untenable direction where we've lost a lot of our stature among nations around the world. It's been kind of embarrassing. So why not try this democratic socialism, this social democracy, this political revolution, and see if we can do a little better?
Yeah,
so
no, I think
people's votes and bullying immigrants. How about expanding the franchise, including people who've been left out, like the working class and the poor, elderly, disabled
on
folks?
that. I agree 100%.
Honest journalists.
Yeah, that would be nice. But here's something I think and I want you to think about the people who you knew when you first came to Seattle, and who lived in Capitol Hill when it was affordable. Because this to me is a part of connecting these dots. You know, Bernie Sanders is the first president in, you know, really going back to the LBJ, War on Poverty, in the early 1960s as a Democrat that talks about, there have been a couple of others. Of course, King did it all the way up until 68. Would have, if he wasn't assassinated, would have done the Poor People's Campaign that Reverend Barber is talking about now. And, you know, and maybe there are a couple of other candidates here and there along the way, but none of them have been, you know, close to a nomination for President of the United States. And I think that it is so critically important that people who make $25,000, $30,000 a year, the average American makes about $29,500 a year, you know, that person who lived on Capitol Hill, who was 26 years of age, you know, in 2002, whenever it was that you moved there, you know, they now are living in an apartment that is 50% higher than it was back then. And just think about how that affects their lives. They then have to move because they can't afford there. Or maybe they had to get 2 or 3 other roommates if they wanted to stay in the neighborhood. What that situation is like, you know, that stops everything. People said this, you know, if you don't have enough money, you can't get married. You don't have enough money. You can't do the things that you've been wanting to do for maybe a long time now. So all that has an impact, and I think a lot of young people are saying, this is already getting crazy. I've been promised and bamboozled all this nonsense, and it's not getting any better. So we got to find somebody who's willing to actually make change and speak truth to power. Your thoughts. I get about 2 minutes, my friend.
I was talking to a friend just the other day about how difficult it is to live in Seattle for some people who have a minimum wage paying job that does not cover their rent, because in some cases, Jeff, the rents have gone up 100%, 200%, 300% in Seattle. So I had a friend who was living in a tower, and he paid maybe like $900 a month. Now it's $4,000 for that apartment. So yeah, and then you have a mass transit system that doesn't work and the infrastructure hasn't been built to accommodate the fact that people can't afford to live in the city where they work, so they have to commute hours and hours every day through mass transit, and it's just not sustainable. So, I mean, that's where we're at. And if people are comfortable with mass homelessness and, huge student debts, disappearing middle class and outsourcing of jobs, then continue with the current corporate Wall Street way of doing things, but I don't see it working for the average person in the United States. And as I said, you can push this kind of agenda so far before people say, you know what, I think I'm going to vote for this Bernie guy, because these corporate people are ripping us off, and we all know it now. And even with the billions that are being spent on the propaganda machines, trying to control these elections, there's still enough people out there that realize what's going on, and the wool is not being pulled over their eyes. So they're looking for an authentic candidate.
No doubt. It's always great chatting with you. Every Tuesday right here on the Jeff Santos Show is Mark Taylor-Canfield. Again, check him out online, Mark Taylor-Canfield, on Twitter. And, of course, you can find him in a lot of different places. And go to some places where you can buy his music, too. Where can we do that, Mark? People want to buy your music, or at least listen to it.
The best thing to do is go to my YouTube channel, actually, and it's just under my name, Mark Taylor-Canfield, or check me out on Facebook and Twitter, and you'll catch up on all of my latest gigs and stuff and what's been going on. I also have you can go to Bandcamp, which is a good place to find my song called Sold Me Down the River, which is kind of the theme of a lot of what's been going on in this country lately.
Bandcamp, I love that. And, of course, for the folks with protection of journalists, it's rsf.org, right?
Correct. Reporters Without Borders. So there's a lot of other great groups like Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, SPJs, Society for Professional Journalism does some good stuff. Free Press is another great organization on these. Right. So there are people out there doing good work, and they really deserve to get creds for standing up for freedom of the press. It's very important to our democracy.
No doubt.
We don't have one.
That's for sure. Mark, all the best. Talk to you next Tuesday. Thank you.
Always great to talk to you, Jeff. Keep up the good work.
You too. This is Jeff Santos. I want to thank Joey for producing this broadcast. Thank Mark Pacheco for giving us the platform. Keep on fighting, folks. Keep on fighting. Watch the debate tonight. We'll talk about it tomorrow. My name is Jeff Santos, and I gotta go.
Broadcasting live from the Thom Federal Credit Union studios at 14 Church Green, we are AM 1530, WVBF, Middleborough, Taunton, and W259DD, Middleborough Center, 99.7 FM.